This is Becoming Inclusive from the Kaleidoscope Group, where we're thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion for more empowered people at work. We're committed to real change, and that begins with real conversations. Welcome in.
Hi, I'm Reggie Ponder, and welcome to another edition of Becoming Inclusive. I'm really excited to be back with my co-host, Catherine Potts. Hey, Kat, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Glad to be here as always.
So you had a discussion with Hanlie, and you said, look, Reggie, we need to invite her back. So in the guest chair, everybody look out. We have Hanlie van Wyk, and she is the global engagement leader as well as a subject matter expert for the Kaleidoscope Group. Hanlie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we talked about change last time, and every time we talk about change, it makes me think about going on a diet, because I want to lose a couple of pounds here, and it's always tough to do it. And I think you're going to help me today. I think you're going to help me because there's actually a formula for change, and I think I just be trying to do it the best way that I could do it. So, am I right? Are you going to help me a little bit here?
I'm sure that you'll find something in there that you're going to find helpful. I'm confident.
Excellent. And so we're not talking about change as it relates to a diet, which I brought up, but we're just talking about change in general. And this change can relate to organizational change. It can relate to individual change, and it can even relate to like group change, things that you need to have happen within your group. And so I will tell you the thing, Hanlie, that we talked about before is that change is so scary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to say something to that.
No, I was going to say it absolutely can be. And yet we are adapting to change all the time in our lives. Like we said last week, right? You leave college, you start your first job, you get married, you have children. Those are changes that happen all the time. But yes, sometimes when we think about it, I think it is very scary.
And I think change, and I just want to throw this in there too, like I think that change is scary for some people in some instances, because I would say like I'm someone that I like certain things to see, like my processes, to stay the same. But like I love when things get like shaken up and there's big change to like propel forward. So like I really think it depends on the context, and it's a little bit more subjective.
100%.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Kat, because you're right. It's not scary for everybody. It's like, okay, there's a new challenge. There's something else out here happening. But I will tell you, just on a little thing is that prior to my kids coming back home from college, life was so different. I knew where I put the salt shaker. I knew I knew where stuff was. And I'm just telling you, this change right now has me up in an uproar because I can't find my stuff. So you're right. Change is not always scary, but sometimes it is definitely challenging. Let me say that.
Definitely.
It's definitely challenging. I'm still looking for that salt shaker. I am, but Hanlie. So as we talk about change, you talk about that there is a formula for change. Talk me through that.
Absolutely. So I spent about 5 years researching how one can help people with these changes and how to practice new behaviors so they become habits, because we want behaviors that make people more inclusive or help people lose weight or help people become better leaders, whatever it may be, any behavior. And what I found was that there's a lot out there, but it's not quite enough to just focus on one. You have to kind of look at a whole bunch of different change theories, change ideas, how change works, how people get to make people behave in a certain way. There's a bit of coercion. How does all of that work? And so I looked at research that had to do with how it works in casinos that get people coming back all the time, or how you could change painting a staircase to help people take the stairs and not the escalator, or what is it in an individual that needs to happen for them to think about the changes that they want to make and the new behaviors. And from all of that research over that 5-year period, I came up with this structure or this formula for change.
All right. Well, seriously, I'm so excited about this because one of the changes that's happening now is in my LGBTQ community. I am working really, really hard to use the right terminology. And I will tell you that it's been a challenge. Not a challenge because it's not important to me. It's just been somewhat of a challenge. So I'm really interested in talking about this as it relates to that for myself, because I'll look at it in with that kind of lens. And I just want to throw that out. Kat?
Well, yeah, I think one of the key things that you already said, Hanlie, is about habits, right? Because it's really hard to kind of break a habit. If you're used to saying, for me anyway, I'm used to saying you guys, which that's like one of the most common things that I say, but it's such a habit. I don't even think twice. But, what's interesting is like once you start trying to work on that, now it's like when I hear other people say guys, or like I'll say it and I'm instantly like rats.
That's me too. I'm like, I said you guys again.
So I'm so cognizant of it now. But I think to Hanley's point, though, it's like getting to that point, though, of where I'm like, because I always knew, I've always been a supporter of the LGBTQ plus community, but it wasn't until, quite recently where I was like, I really got to get on top of that. But that's a hard habit to just like switch, even, and that's a simple one.
And it's funny that you say that, Kat, because I still haven't gotten to the point of saying LGBTQ plus. So I'm still just saying LGBTQ, and then somebody will remind me, what about the plus? Don't forget the plus. So you're right. I have the motivation, but the habit that I've had for the last 50 years has been you guys, and so.
That's so accurate, and it's so funny. I was laughing when you were saying that because I do exactly the same thing, because it's a long-standing habit that I've dragged with me from South Africa, and I also every now and again I catch myself doing that. And so there is a nice beginning is that we all are highly motivated from a very deep place to make this an important change in our lives. We say we care about this community, we care about how we show up. And so those deep motivators are the first or one of the things you need to have and or increase, because if we were not motivated and we didn't care about it, or it made no real difference one way or the other, it would be very difficult to find the energy to keep on reminding ourselves or keep saying, oh, I did it again, I'm sorry, and try again, right? So the motivation has to be really high. And I
want to ask a question here. So I'm working in a factory. And the new policy now is you have to close the outside door. We never close the outside door. So it doesn't seem to make sense to me, has no real bearing on whether I do my job. I've been doing this job for 20 years in the same place. They didn't change the door. They didn't change anything.
Yep.
So I am not motivated at all about closing this door.
No, and you're not motivated because you maybe don't know why it's important. No one has said it's important because it saves us money. It makes it more safe for you, whatever it may be. So without that context of the why or the deep motivators, it's really, really difficult to compel people into action. And that's really the distinction. I distinguish motivation from wanting to do something to actually feeling compelled to, I can't not do it, right?
Right.
Because, you could want to lose weight all day long and sit on the couch. That is not enough. There has to be something that is such a burning platform that it makes you want to practice, want to do something differently. So that's the part of motivation that I think is really critical.
And I think too, I would imagine too, sometimes in the workplace, there's like two buckets of people, right? The people that'll just do something because they're, out of fear, like I'm going to make sure the back door is closed. I'm going to make sure I got to do this. But then I feel like there's a large majority that are exactly what you're talking about, Hanlie, where it's like, I would put myself in there, is where it's like, for me to really like attach to something, like I need to know the why, and I need to, to consistently do it, where it's not like, okay, I'm going to do it for a few weeks while they're all watching.
Yep.
And then after that, it's out the window and I'm going to go back to whatever I want to do. I see that. I've seen that in everywhere I've worked, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, and that can even be with the pronouns. Maybe if it's fear-based, you might show up in a group and then do the pronouns. But when you leave the group, you just do whatever you want. And that's not real change, right? That's not deep change. And that's what we're really after. So that motivation piece is critically important.
So how do you, I guess in the motivation aspect, it made me think, how do you correlate, or how do you bridge between like the personal and the workplace, right? Because because that's hard too, because in the workplace, someone may be motivated in the workplace to, care about the people around them and want to make sure they feel included and everything, but then they may not really vibe with all of that, and then outside of there not do that. But I could see where that could be problematic, because you're shifting too much between the two.
but what's interesting here, before you answer that, Hanlie, is that you were talking about we have change every day. Is that when I come home and put my feet on top of the table, Donna doesn't like that, by the way, but when I come home and do that, I know for sure I cannot walk into my boss's office and do the same thing. I already know that. There's no, I don't need to be motivated. I know for sure that I have to split the two. So answer her question, but with that in mind.
So I think, Kat, to your question, it's really important that our DE&I efforts are directly linked to business outcomes. Like, why does it matter for me at work to practice this new behavior, or to adopt this new habit, or to use pronouns in a specific way, whatever that particular behavior is? And that's when we walk across from one context, the context of me, myself, how I feel, how I think, how I believe, into the context of systems, rules, regulations, policies, procedures, businesses, and also us as a group when we are a team at work, how we show up. So all of these contexts matters. It matters in your personal context, self. It matters in your team and group context, social. It matters in the systems in which you find yourself every day, because there are rules and regulations all around us all the time. And it matters also in the physical space or situations that we find ourselves in on a daily basis. So that motivation has to carry through all of those contexts.
And so on using the LGBTQ plus example, is what you're saying is that I have to tie that to something more than just a social outcome. I have to tie that to something more than being nice to people, and is that it needs to mean something beyond that for me to get that deep motivation that you're talking about?
I feel like that's really quick. I feel like that's why people say too, people have to change for themselves and not for other people. And why that's not like sustainable, because it really has to be being motivated by someone else may be great and make the short term, but if you're not like buying into it that same way like you're talking about, Hanlie, I could see the correlation.
And so there comes a very interesting other part of the formula. So let's say that you are highly motivated. This matters to you and you would like to do this. So you practice this all the time, but you find yourself in a context at work that doesn't do that at all and doesn't care, and in fact goes completely contrary to what you're trying to adopt as a new behavior. That then becomes a barrier, because it's difficult for you to take your motivations into the workplace where there's something contrary, something stopping you doing it, to then continue practicing it. And that's why we have to bring people along with us, what we call social contagion. Like, a lot of my behavior contagious other people and they contage me. And they found that true to be in things like rudeness is very contagious. Weight loss, weight gain, very contagious. Smoking cessation or starting to smoke, very contagious. So our behaviors influence each other all the time. And if I'm coming across those barriers, if I can't reduce those barriers, it will become harder. Not impossible, but harder for me to adopt that new behavior.
But here's the problem I have, Hanlie, is that I am a male in the workplace, and I'm like, I don't understand why you guys are being so soft. Why you don't adapt my way? My way is don't care. Why do you care what they call you? I don't care what they call you. As long as they pay me, I'm good. You, as long as you pay me and we get results, we get our bonus, I'm happy. So I'm confused as to why you're so stuck on these. I can't say you guys, and it's pissing me off. In fact,
and that takes us back to motivation. If your personal motivation isn't there, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to convince you to behave otherwise. And in the context of behavior change, that's then where we will focus some of our time and energy to say, how do we help people understand the context in which they live and how what they are doing, both the impact of it and the intent of it, is causing other people around you to become more unhappy. And I think that's part of that awareness building. But it might also be sometimes that's the case because people are fearful because they don't know what to do or how to do it.
I love that.
And that brings us to the other part of the formula that we have to increase. We have to increase people's capability, which is both competence and confidence. So competence could be linked in this example to how do pronouns work? When do you use them this way? When do you use them that way? So without you having that knowledge, so knowledge is very important, but not sufficient for change, that would be one of the areas that we then address to say, all right, to help you be maybe a little bit less fearful or feel that you are competent at doing this, we're going to do some training and you're going to practice that, build confidence, so that once that's out of the way or that's been increased together with your motivation, it may even increase your motivation to say, okay, I now know how to do it, so I can go out confidently and use pronouns and my motivation will shift along with it. That would be one of the ways that we can address part of that example that you brought up.
Wow, I love that. I love that. So the first thing that we talk about, though, I think is self. Is that the first part? Is like I kind of like I really need to work on myself to figure out what my motivation is, what's important to me, and those types of things. And how do I guess even how Kat talks about how do I mesh that with the way I feel outside of the office. I need to figure out how to make all that stuff work together.
Yeah, exactly. I have a friend that always used to say, you are wherever you go. So you take with you your beliefs, your filters, your fears, everything that it lives inside of you is part of self. Your beliefs, your values, all of those things matter. And so that's really where part of that first piece of self-awareness comes to say, all right, what are my motivators? Why do I want to change my behavior and adopt this new habit? Sometimes it helps people who are struggling with that. It might be through coaching or training that they have some insights, and that's where we can shift a little bit of the self. The second part of that is social, because we all live amongst and with other people, right? So the social context in which you find yourself becomes very, very important because, again, like I said, if you're in a social context that's contrary to what you're trying to achieve, it's going to make it harder for you to achieve that.
And I want to stay on that second point just for a moment. Is that because when it is contrary, it's been found in many research and a lot of research, that a lot of people will just not push back. They'll say, well, that's what they're doing. Maybe I don't participate, but I'm surely not going to push back on it. So if I'm supposed to not whistle, if I'm supposed to not whistle at women as they're walking past me and all the other guys are doing it, I just won't do it. I won't say anything to the other guys. I won't say, come on, guys, stop doing that. I mean, the research kind of bears that out, correct?
Absolutely. So that's probably part of the Milgram experiments that they did after the Second World War, where people would follow certain behaviors because someone was telling them to do it. But also very often, because you are in a context in which people behave a certain way, even if you don't believe it, as you say, you'll either keep quiet or you'll just go along with it, right? So they've done some other experiments around that as well that's indicated that.
Yeah, like the bystander effect.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas in which that plays out very strongly is people who are trying to rehabilitate from drug abuse. So very often you'll find that the suggestion is don't go back into that community because the temptations there are so high and so much that it's difficult for you to stick to your new behaviors. And that brings us to another part of the formula, which is you have to reduce the temptations around you, the active distractions that are trying to take you away from practicing that new behavior or adopting that new habit. And so if you happen to find yourself in those communities, maybe you should think about getting new friends.
Yeah, well, I actually was working with like authenticity coach for a while, and that's one of the main things. It's like you are who you are around to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
and even if you are, you love or you like the people around you, the impact that they have on you is a much greater than I think some people realize. And to rewind a little bit to a point you made earlier about not being aware of the impact that you have, because that's pretty much where it starts, right? Because if you don't think you have a big impact, you're thinking, oh, it doesn't really matter that I'm saying, "Got you guys." Who really cares? Nobody. But you can genuinely think it's not that big of a deal. There's a part of lack of empathy there for sure, which is another key. But I think there's a lot of room there for helping people understand it's that their impact, their intent may not be. Your intent could be great, could be, I'm not coming from an ill place, but that doesn't discount the fact that you're negatively possibly impacting a business, a person, a unit, whatever it is.
Yeah, Kat, and I buy that, but Hanlie, I can't remove myself from my job.
Mm-hmm.
When I go into this factory job, it's the job that I have. It's the job that I need.
Mm-hmm.
We all had training, but the majority of us are basically saying, we're not going to do that. That doesn't really make a difference. These people bringing these new things in, and so I want to do it,
mm-hmm.
but I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared to buck the system, and so I hear you when you talk about removing the temptation, but that's kind of difficult when the environment is the temptation.
Exactly. And that's when you have both the context of the systems, right? The rules, regulations, policies, and procedures aren't sending a clear message that this is not the way to behave and we will not tolerate it. And so no one takes it seriously. And you're in a social context in which there are different rules or unspoken rules, unspoken permissions that kind of thing is just we're not going to do it. So if you find yourself as a person who's highly motivated in a context that is not allowing you, is a barrier, and there are temptations, and it's not increasing your motivation or your competence or your confidence, it will be difficult for you in that particular scenario to be changing, to keep your behavior changed and develop that habit. You might want to be a change agent and then become more of an advocate for something. And some people are geared that way, not personality-wise, and can do that. But if you're perhaps more of an introvert and it's not the kind of thing that you would naturally do, in time, I think you will become very unhappy in those scenarios, right? Because it's contrary to your own values and your own motivators. And maybe you're stuck in that job, and that is very unfortunate. But hopefully we as Kaleidoscope Group can change some of those contexts, right? So that people don't have to experience that kind of discomfort and unhappiness.
Well, I love that. So you talk about self, you talked about social, and you touched a little bit on the systems, talking about the policies, practices, and procedures. A lot of folks believe that the systems are real important because you change all this other stuff, but if the system doesn't, and you just kind of mentioned it, if the system doesn't support that, then you're kind of flailing in the wind or swimming upstream or whatever one of those phrases that you want to use.
Absolutely. And in all of these contexts, right, self, social, systems, and spaces, the minute you take one or another context out, a lot of the robustness of that change goes away. So I can be motivated, I can be amongst friends, and that'll be quite a strong motivator for me to behave in a certain way. But if the system is going to go contrary to us, there's going to be tension, right? Or if the system is there, but I'm not motivated to make the change, and my friends don't care. So they all have to be in play all the time to make sure that they're aligned, and that most of the power for the change will come from that.
So you brought up the last one, spaces. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's a very unnoticed and undervalued context. For example, when you walk into a theater, the way that it's designed is to make you behave in a certain way. You go, you sit, you face a certain direction, right? So it guides your behavior. When growing up in South Africa, what guided a lot of our behaviors is that there were segregated entrances. Certain people couldn't go on certain beaches just because of the color of your skin, right? The spaces that we created pulled people apart. So there's a lot of power in how we design space because it creates set and setting for behavior. So in today's context, it might be look around at the posters that you have up on your walls or on your website. Think about, for example, we mentioned last time, bathrooms. It's a very clear message that gets sent if you are trying to have an LGBTQ plus conversation and there might be transgender people. What are you saying? What is the message that you're sending when you just have male and female bathrooms, right? So what is the conversation that you're having through space, through design, through architecture? It plays a very big role that we often don't notice because it's so much in the background, to everything that we experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like, is this space supporting the system?
Exactly. And the behaviors, right? Because you want to encourage certain behaviors.
Yeah, are they all aligned? Because, like, to your point, it's like, okay, you could have all these systems, but then your space doesn't convey that properly.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Your space could, but then the systems, the policies and all that are not in line with, the poster that you have on the wall talking about rights for whoever, but you're not really putting that into a real system.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a real-time example also. Very often when I'm doing organizational reviews, one of the first places I go to look is at the teams page of the organization. And there'll be a lot of talk about D&I and we're diverse and we're inclusive. And then I open the page and all I see is a stream of the same people on that page. And then I'm like, it just sends the wrong message. Maybe that is true, but what are you showing me? What are you showing me that's telling me maybe I'm not sure if I can believe that?
Well, I love this piece about the spaces. Just as kind of related is that when my girls are older now and in college, but when they were younger, we would go to American Doll. And if you've ever been to American Doll, from a space perspective, they have figured out how to make you do certain behaviors. They're the best at it because you cannot get out of there without buying something. They send you past everything imaginable, and you got to go past the tea place, and you got to go past the strollers, and it's so upsetting that I am getting kind of like hives right now talking to you about it because they got me. They got me. But what you're saying here really resonates to me because if you can design a space like that, figure out how to make sure that people flow through a certain way, that they see certain things, that products are there. And if you can design a space like that and get us to do what you wanted us to do, and we did, by the way, why can't we do that in the way in which you're talking? Did I kind of go too far to the left there or no?
I think sometimes it's just that it's a area. I think that's what's so nice about this conversation, Hanlie bringing this up, that it just goes by the wayside. It's just not, people think about it as, at least in a workplace, like, you want it to look aesthetically pleasing for meetings. You want to have nice desks, maybe. You want to have, the basics, but no one's actually, I don't think, thinking of the impact. I mean, I know some companies that have decided, okay, we're not going to do any cubicles. We're just going to have glass, or we're just going to have this. So those are like small ways to consider, but I think, where does that fit into your overall business plan?
Right.
And I don't know that it's always there.
Exactly. And very often the design is left to people to do who are trying to save money or save space or for certain efficiencies, which is perfectly understandable, but it is worth us considering or looking at the spaces around us with a fresh eye. You know how you can sometimes leave a tangle of your cords in the corner there, and eventually you don't even see them anymore, right? You kind of become completely blind to it. This is just a way that you can say, if I had a visitor come into the space, they would look at it completely differently, and maybe I look at it very differently suddenly as well, right? Because someone else is looking at it. and what is the message that is being sent throughout all of the interaction you have with the different spaces in which you find yourself at work or sometimes at home.
And I'm smiling because you know darn well that pile of cords needs to be moved. You just don't want to do it because as soon as
just me recently,
as soon as your girlfriend, your wife, somebody comes in, you're taking them cords, trying to hide them and try to make it look good. So I love that idea. So I want to recap.
Wait, but really quick,
Yeah,
I want to that point though, for me, just quick example is I did that recently because our office and our guest room is one, and there were all these cords, and I was like, this isn't functional, right? I gotta tape this up. I gotta do this because this is too much for my grandma. But why I want to bring this up is because I don't know that I'm buying into it so much because obviously I leave it the way that it is. I know that it's not danger. I know that it's not the best. You know what I mean? And I just wanted to cherry on top the points you've made, Hanlie. But it took a motivator of somebody else and knowing how it affects them, and it's going to affect me too. If, grandma slips on, it's my fault, to get me to that next level, which sort of like proves the point that you're making, which is like, there was that motivator that made me now not have this array of cords just, out flailing around. But that's how I could see that translating into anything in the workplace. Like that's what it took. It took me to need that motivator.
100%.
I love that. So there's 4 things, well, really 8 things you talked about. But the first is you talked about self, social, systems, and spaces. So recap that for me.
Great. So those are the 4 contexts in which we find ourselves living all the time, right? You are wherever you go. You're always in between and amongst people. People are influencing you. You're influencing them. There are always rules, regulations, policies, and procedures that are guiding our behaviors no matter what we do. And then there are the spaces within which we move and live. So those are the 4 contexts in which we find ourselves.
And then you talked to me about, and I love this discussion about barriers, temptation, capability, and motivation. So recap that for me as well. We'll obviously have some materials or somewhere where people can follow up on this, but I do want to recap those as well.
Sure. So within each of those contexts, there is a formula at play. And that formula was developed through the Behavioral Research and Applied Technology Laboratory, which was those 5 years of research, right? And the important things to remember with the formula is you have to increase competence and confidence. You have to increase motivation, which means being compelled to act, not just wanting to act. And you have to decrease barriers, which are static things that get in your way, and temptations, which are more the active distractions that are going to take you away from the behaviors that you're trying to adopt and practice.
Okay. This Kat, go ahead. I see you there.
No, I'm just like, yes, let's wrap this up and tell companies what to do with it because I think that's the thing is change is this complex thing and there's so many things to it and obviously the easy thing to do, as I mentioned earlier, was you want it to be a switch, right? That easy.
Yep.
But there's these buckets and those buckets take time to empty out.
Yeah, and it's like this, I always say to people, this formula is at play all the time. So you might do something right for a while, or you might become very competent at practicing using pronouns, and then one day you'll slip up and we'll say, you guys, right? That's okay, because then you just say, okay, I got it. What I need to remember is this is how I'm going to do it next time. And then you bring back the formula. So it's also very forgiving to say, no one's perfect. You're going to make mistakes. And when you make those mistakes or when you lose track of what you're trying to do, just go back to the formula, bring it back on track again, and keep going.
But when you talk to us like this, to me, you give us a blueprint for how to look at change. So while it's always at play, at least there's some way in which I can, from a conceptual perspective, say, oh, okay. There's the self, there's the social, there's the system, and then the spaces. And for me, The first three, I saw those, but the fourth one, and the Kat kind of mentioned it too, is that when you talk about spaces, do you really think about that as much? I don't, and I'm really happy that you brought that into my thinking. I'm going to remember that as well. And then I personally, I'm going to let Kat have the last word here, but I also personally like this whole thing of the distinction between barriers and temptations. Because in some ways, I could see how you could feel that they're the same. Is that as long as you keep putting that piece of cake in front of me, that's a barrier and it's a temptation. But there's difference, because you're saying that its barriers are a little more concrete and hard, and the temptations are those things that sometimes you might not even be able to put your hand on, a little bit more nebulous. So wow, Hanlie, thank you so much. Kat.
No, I mean, I really don't have anything to add, because I just think about the parallel of life and work. Earlier was like, how do we find that translation between the two? But it's like these practices, this blueprint, how to facilitate change. I mean, it transitions whether it's personal or work. Those same practices, the same blueprint, these same things are exactly the same. How you create the space of your house based on how you feel. Space of your workplace, like the impact that has, regardless of the context, is going to be the same.
Wow. Well, look, this has been a fantastic discussion. Hanlie, thank you so much for joining us again. If you don't know, you guys, that's Hanlie van Wyk, and she is the global engagement leader as well as the subject matter expert at the Kaleidoscope Group. And that is Catherine Potts, my co-host. I'm Reggie Ponder. This is Becoming Inclusive. Thank you for joining us for this particular episode, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Becoming Inclusive is presented by the Kaleidoscope Group, your full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion partner serving clients worldwide. Learn more and continue the conversation at kgdiversity.com.